Animus! Animus is the draft building card game with a multiverse of ever-changing decks that fit in your pocket. It's a 2 to 4 player game in which the players draft a combat force of 9 unique characters from a spanning multiverse while leading their team with one of several powerful entities. Attempting to rule the multiverse, mysterious entities sought the power of the Singularity, which binds reality together. Their tampering caused it to erupt and scatter its power across time and space. Across the multiverse, various beings were infused with aspects of this power. Now, these entities seek to gather this power for their own avaricious desires. As one of these entities, you must now gather your forces, claim your power, and save or conquer existence.
Hello everyone, I'm Ed Rodriguez, creator of the Animus draft building card game, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to play the game. The game comes with everything you see here except this playmat here. It's a rubber playmat that is available. It is sold separately, but everything on top of it is what you get. So you get, of course, a rule booklet here to teach you how to play the game. Besides this video, you get these large jumbo cards, which are entity cards. I'll go into what they do. The backs of them are used as reference material. So there's 6 large jumbo cards that are entity cards, and then there's 36 character cards that you're going to use in the game. There's a bunch of dice that come with it and a bunch of plastic damage tokens. During the game, you're going to be playing as a powerful entity that has a special ability that only you will have. You're going to be using your entity along with a bunch of character cards that you're going to be summoning and putting into play to combat your opponent. What you're trying to do is you're trying to gain a certain amount of points in order to win the game. We'll go into the points in a minute. Although there are 2 types of cards in the game, really there's only one type you need to learn. We'll go over the easy one, which are the entity cards. Here are 2 examples. They're just these very large cards that are going to be in front of you. These represent you, they're the character that you're playing, and you're going to have a special ability. Now, all cards in the game, in their text box, the very first word is going to be a key word that's going to let you know how or when that ability activates. So for instance, Justice here, her ability is in a reaction, and the text will tell you what it's reacting to, whereas Lilith here says tactical. That's a tactical ability that she'll be able to activate during the tactics part of the game. But essentially that's all there is to the entity cards. They just have one special ability that is going to help you throughout the game, and as I mentioned before, the backs of them function as a reference card. So if you're playing as Lilith, you're not going to be using another one. You can use the other ones as a reference sheet. The cards that you really need to learn are the character cards. Like I said, there's 36 of them in the game, and during the game you're going to draft the 9 of them out of the 36 to become part of your deck. So every time you play the game, you're going to draft and you're going to have different characters. So anyway, let's go over the anatomy of the card, and it's very simple. There's a big number in the upper left hand corner. That is their Animus level, and it's going to be a number of 1, 2, or 3. We see a 1 and a 3 here, and that is a measure of about how powerful that card is. So you have a level 1 here who's technically not as powerful as a level 3, but that's more of a reference to their text ability and not so much their stats. Most cards are competent in combat, but this is a double-edged sword. So you may think you may want to have a bunch of level 3s in your deck, which will be good. You have powerful cards, but when they are killed, as we'll see later, and are in the discard pile, these points are going to count against you. The first player that has 10 points in the discard pile loses the game. So that's the very first thing, is the Animus level. You want to have a balance in your deck. Next, we have their Animus type. There are 3 types in the game. You don't really have to memorize it. There's skill, power, and then there's a green one called talent. And they have a rock, paper, scissors relationship, but basically the top icon is the type they are. So Zen here in particular is red, which is power type, whereas Inertia here, she is blue, which is the skill type. And all that does is during combat, it's going to determine if you have an advantage or disadvantage versus your opponent, as we can see by the bottom icon. The bottom icon is the type that they are advantageous against. So Inertia here, she's good against red power types, whereas Zen here is good against green talent types. And that's what that is, and we'll explain what the advantage actually is later. And then you have two numbers here. The top one is their melee skill, how good that character is in melee. And the bottom one is their flank skill, how good that character is fighting in flank. Characters are usually going to be better at one than the other, but they can almost always fight in either position. Of course, we have the character's name in the center, and then we have their text box. Like we mentioned before, it's a special ability, and the first word is a keyword, letting you know how it's used. Now, the cool thing about this game is that every single card in the game is going to have a unique ability. So the ability that Zen has here, only he will have that. No other card's going to have that. Same thing with Inertia here. And then finally, we have some flavor text at the bottom, which just gives you a little bit of a snippet of the backstory of that character. Now, I've mentioned that this is a drafting game, so you're going to set up a draft as part of the startup of the game. So first, you're going to set out 6 cards the way we see there. They're all going to be face down. And then you're going to set up another line of face-up cards, just like this, in between them. And then we're going to make another line of face-down cards. And then finally, one last line of 3 face-up cards. And this is going to be the drafting area. We're not going to draft yet, but when we get to it, what the players are going to do, you can draft. When it's your turn to draft, you can draft 1 card, and you can draft any card that is face-up with no other cards on top of it. So at the beginning of the draft, only these 3 cards will be available to draft, but you'll be able to look ahead and see the cards that are coming. Apologize for this glare here. As you draft cards, so for instance, if it was my turn to draft and I draft this card, I put it. Now, cards that you draft do stay face up so the other player can't see them. And once a card doesn't have anything on top of it, it can be flipped to reveal it. Now, although we are set up for the draft, we're not actually going to start yet. First, you want to get your entity cards. You're going to take the entity cards, you're going to shuffle them all up, and then each player is going to randomly draw 2, and you're going to look at the 2 that you have, and secretly you're going to choose which one you want to play for the game. So let's say, for instance, I want to play here. Now, the reason you do this in this order is because you may want to base the one that you select based on some of the cards that you see. Some cards will work better with certain entities than other, although everything's viable. So let's say, just for sake of argument, in this one, I want to take the unspeakable entity. So I would place that face down in front of me. That's my selection. And the one that I don't take, I'm going to put it face down and just put it to the side. Later, during the course of the game, the ones not selected, again, can be used as a reference sheet. And then once the players have their entity cards, basically the draft can begin. Each player will just draw. Now, there is one caveat on the drafting. The player who drafts second gets to draft 2 in a row for their first draft. So if I'm player 1, let's say I take Gil here, I reveal this card. Then player 2, they're going to get 2 drafts for their first go around. So they can take, let's say they take this card here and reveal something there, and then they get to pick another one in a row. Let's say they like that new one, so they'll take that. And then after that, the players will be 1 at a time each. So it'll go back to my turn. Let's say I want this one here. I'll reveal 2 with that. And we'll keep going like that. The next player will go. And as you can see, you can get very strategic by planning out which ones you're picking, because of what you can see ahead. You can sort of almost force another player to pick certain things as you go along. Now, that drafting method that I showed you is actually for 2 players. When you're playing with 3 or 4 players, because you can play multiplayer, the drafting is going to be a lot different and much more simplified. You're just going to take the characters deck, you're going to shuffle it up, and then each player is going to just draw 3 cards. They're going to look at their 3 cards, and then they're going to pick one of them. So for instance, let's say I decide I want to take this card here. I'll put it face up in front of me, or rather I'll put it face down in front of me. And then the other 2 I'm going to discard. And then once the players have made that one pick, then we'll all reveal them. So the choices still will be known, just not quite immediately. And then you're going to take the next 3, and you'll keep going like that. As the players are discarding cards, the cards, once the draw deck or rather the draft deck runs out, the discarded ones will get shuffled again. So there may be a chance that some of the ones that you passed on may come back later. So that's how you do the drafting for multiple players. Once the players have drafted all the cards, each player should have 9 cards in their deck. So you're gonna go ahead and take your entity and you're gonna put it face up in front of you, and then you're gonna take your 9 card, the cards that you drafted for your deck, you're gonna shuffle it up. That's gonna be your draw deck. You're gonna go ahead and shuffle that up, and then you're gonna draw 4 cards for your starting hand. You're gonna look at them, and then you're gonna choose one of those cards, a card that you don't want, that you don't think you're gonna need for a while in the game, and you're gonna take that card and you're gonna put it on the bottom of your deck. Anytime you put something on the bottom of your deck, that's called a reset. So you're gonna draw 4 cards, reset, and then you're gonna have a hand of 3 cards. The normal hand in this game is 3 cards. That's what you're gonna have throughout. The turn order in this game is really very simple. If you've played other card games, this should be all pretty much second nature. So at the start of your turn, you have your start phase, and you're just gonna check to see if there's some cards will have a start keyword. You just check to see if they have that, and if they do, they'll do something at that point. But obviously at the beginning of the game, you're not gonna have anything. So that's your start phase. You just check to see if there's anything that mentions the start of the phase, and you'll activate at that point. Then we get into what's called the tactical phase. The tactical phase is one of the main parts of the game. That's when you can do all kinds of stuff. So you have 3 main tactical abilities. You can play a card from your hand, you can switch around cards that you haven't played, and you can do something called resetting a card. We'll go into each one individually. One of the main ones that you're going to use throughout the game is the play ability, and that's simply taking a card from your hand and playing it to the battlefield. Now, if you start your turn with no cards in play, you have to play a card. This is the only time in the game that you're forced to play a card, unless the card says otherwise. But generally, you don't have to play a card, but you usually want to. But if you start your turn with no cards in play, you have to play something. So how does that go? There's no resource cost to manage in this game. Basically, any card can be played. If you want to play a card, you simply just select the card you're going to play, and you announce that you're playing it, and you're going to put it down into the battlefield. Now, you notice that there's these spots here. If you don't have the playmat, you're just going to have to sort of make it up, but we use the playmat to let you know what's going on. You have a couple combat positions. You have 1 melee position here, you have 2 flank positions, and you have 2 support positions. When you play a card, you have to play them as far up front as possible. So the first card you play must go into the melee position. All right. Now, later on, the third card that you play can go into one of the 2 flank positions. And you can choose either one that you want, left or right. Now, the third card you play later on, now you have a choice. You can either play it into the support position because you have a card in front of it, or you can actually go ahead and go into the other flank position, which is what you usually want. And then later on in the game, you can fill up, these support positions. So to be clear, you just got to remember that you can't play a card to a spot unless there's a card in front of it. Now, the main purpose of the positions is just where that card can attack during combat and which stat it's going to use, so that the positioning determines what they can do in combat, although some cards may have effect text that depend on where they are placed on the field. So that's the play action. Now, the play action you can only do once per turn, and it has to be during your tactical phase. So you play a card. The other action that you can do is the switch action. Now, this action requires having cards in play. You need at least 2 cards in play in order to do this. Now, to switch cards, basically, let's say Jake here is hurt in combat and I want to get him out of the front lines and I want to switch him out with Whisper here. I can use the switch action. Any 2 cards that are next to each other, you can just choose to switch them. Right? Has to be done during your tactical phase, and you can only switch once per turn. So these 2 cards are considered adjacent next to each other. These 2 are considered adjacent, but not these support position cards. They're too far back, so I can't take Solar here and Whisper. They can't switch, but Brick and Whisper here can certainly switch. Again, you can only do that once per turn. Finally, the last tactical ability that you can do on your turn is the reset ability. And basically, you're going to just look at your hand and you can take any one card, any card that you want at all. You're going to choose it and you're going to place it on the bottom of your deck. Now, the reason you're going to be doing that, sometimes you have cards in your hand that are not useful at the moment, so you can just shuffle, not shuffle them away, but you can put them on the bottom of your deck, because at the end of your turn, you're going to draw back up to your hand size. So if you can have less cards in your hand, you'll draw more cards. Now, you can take any card at all and reset it. However, some cards like Lixia here has the reset ability. If this card has the reset ability, anytime it gets reset for whatever reason, so my 1 free reset per turn, or for some other reason, then you get to activate that special ability. Now, it's important that I highlight that because people often get this wrong. The reset ability only happens if you actually reset this card for some reason. So again, once per turn, you can take any one card from your hand and reset it to the bottom of your deck. After the tactical phase, then we'll go into the combat phase. During the combat phase, there's a couple of things you can do. Well, every card that you have in play can attack. Each card can attack once per combat phase, and you can attack whichever order you want, which cards you want, and so on. Just remember that each card can only perform one individual attack, and you don't always have to attack. There are certain situations that it might be better off to just kind of wait and let your opponent attack you later on your turn. But this is where the combat positions matter. So we have the most important one is the melee position. You only have one card there. That card has has essentially 3 options. It can attack the melee card directly across from it, and that's the only time in the game you can do a melee attack unless there's a special ability. So Brick here, for instance, can use his melee stat to perform a melee attack against the guy. That we'll go into how the actual combat mechanics are, but for now, just know that Brick can do a melee attack against the melee position across from him. He can also try to do a flank attack against either one of the 2 flank positions across from him. So your melee character has 3 possible targets that he can go after. Your flank position cards are a little bit more limited. They can only do flank attacks, and they can only do a flank attack to the card directly across from them. So Whisper here can only attack this card over here. Same thing with this card, can only attack straight across. However, they do have one other option. They can do a flank attack versus the melee position. Now, whenever you perform a type of attack, so if Jake here is performing a flank attack, the defender also defends as that type. So if he's doing flank, the defender also is defending with a flank. We'll go into what that is there. So your flank position cards only have 2 options, either the flank across from them or the person in melee, which also means that your melee position has 3 possible people attacking them as well. And then we have the last position, which is the support position. Now, support position cards don't normally attack. They can't attack nor be attacked unless something says otherwise. However, their text box is still active, and there are some cards that will be able to do something even from support position. The actual combat is actually very, very simple, and it may lead you to believe that there's not that much strategy, but there really is. All right, so in this example here, let's say Jake wants to do a melee attack against Gale here. Well, Jake has a 5 in melee. His flank is only a 1. That's a hint letting you know that his melee is much better. So he decides he wants to do a melee attack against the card across it. And I'm going to turn this around just to make it easier for you to understand. So what Jake will do, he announces, I'm going to attack with Jake. You're going to take 1 die and you're going to roll it. Whatever the result is, you're going to add it to their stat. So his 5 plus 3 is an 8. The defender will defend with whatever stat is being used against them. So if Jake is using melee against Gale, Gale will also defend with melee. She's going to take a 6-sided die. She's going to roll it and add it to her stat. She rolled a 6 plus her 2 also makes it an 8, which is actually kind of interesting. We'll go into what a tie is in a minute. However, actually, let's stop right here. So let's say Jake actually had one more. We're gonna cheat a little bit. So Jake has a 9 versus an 8. He wins the combat. Whoever loses the combat is going to take a damage. We'll mark it with a red damage token here. Now, very simply, all cards have the same amount of health unless something says otherwise. Once a card has 3 damage, it is killed and discarded. We'll go into how that works in a minute. All right. In the case of a tie like we just had, then both cards will take a damage. All right. So if they tie there, they will both take a damage simultaneously. That means in every combat, somebody's gonna get hurt. So you wanna take that into consideration. But there is one other level that we didn't go into. Remember I mentioned that the cards have an Animus type and they have type advantages? Well, here's where it matters. Jake here has an advantage versus green type, which is talent. That is what Gil is. She is the green type there. So during combat, Jake would roll 2 dice instead of 1, but he does not get to keep both. When he rolls, actually I should have kept that 3. He rolls 2 of them and then he can choose which one to take. Usually you're gonna want the higher one, but there may be some edge cases where you want a tie for whatever reason. Some abilities trigger off of that. So in this case here, it wasn't a cheat. He got a 4 with us, so he would select the 4, making it 9, beating her 8 there, and dealing a damage to her. Again, if it was a tie, they would both take damage. Now, besides attacking with your characters, there's actually one other thing you can do in combat, but this kind of situation, it depends on the cards that you have. Some cards, like Juvie here, have the combat ability. This one here, the Radalexian, also has a combat ability. And what that does is that during the combat phase, instead of their attack, you can perform their combat ability. So Radalexian here, during combat, right, you can just do a normal attack with him as you wish, but we can instead do this, remove 1 damage from this card. Now that takes the place of their attack, so you choose one or the other. Now this is where it gets interesting because, remember I have said you have cards in support position and they normally can't attack, but their ability is active. So Juvie here, for instance, her combat ability is place 1 damage on any card, then 1 damage on this card. Even though she's in support here, in this example, and she normally wouldn't be able to do an attack, she can still activate her effect text and use her combat ability because it's not a combat, it is not a fight, it is instead of their fight. So that's one purpose of having cards out in support, is they can still use their effect text. And again, having them out in support keeps them safe from normal attacks. Now I mentioned that when cards lose in combat, they take damage. Right? I showed you the damage tokens, and all cards have 3 life points essentially. So once a card has 3 damage, it is going to get killed and discarded. When your card gets killed, you're going to discard it into your discard pile. Now you want to position the cards so you can read their Animus levels, because now that really matters. At the end of your turn, which we'll get into in a minute, you're going to count up how many points you have in a discard pile. If one player has 10 or more points in the discard pile, they're going to lose. If there's a tie, you'll actually continue the game until someone breaks the tie, but usually that's pretty rare. Usually at 10 points, you're going to lose. Whenever a card receives 3 damage and is killed, it is discarded. Now, you'll notice that, let's say in this example, this card was killed here. It leaves an empty spot. You can't have empty spots like that. So in the middle of, no matter what point in the game that happens, a card gets killed and gets put in your discard pile, you must immediately shift cards up to fill that position. This is not an action, it's not anything you're doing, it automatically happens. But you can choose which card to put there. So if my card was killed, I can choose which one that I want to put up. Let's say I want to push Will-O-Wisp up there so that it'll just move up automatically, but I just made another spot open, which means the card behind it must move up as well. So you can't have any open positions there. And the same thing works on the other side. When you're attacking your opponent, if you kill one of their cards, they're going to be able to choose which one sort of slides up and fills the position. So that's everything about combat. And then after your combat phase, you actually have a second tactical phase, and you can play, switch, and reset cards, but only if you haven't done that during the first tactical phase. So essentially, you can play, switch, reset once per turn, but you can do it either before or after combat. After your second tactical phase, you're going to go into your draw phase. And this is where the game differs from other games. Usually you draw at the beginning of your turn. Here you draw towards the end. During your draw phase, you're going to fill your hand back up to 3 cards. So I played a card and I reset a card during my turn. I'm down to 1. I'm going to draw 2 cards. But let's say I didn't reset a card during my turn. I only played 1 and I'd have a hand of 2. Then I would only draw up to 3. Now, it's important to note as you're resetting cards and playing cards, eventually you actually are going to run out of cards in your deck. Your cards are gonna die. You're gonna be doing stuff. Now the game doesn't end like most other games. There's no penalty for having well, actually there is a penalty, but there's nothing really horrible about running out of your deck. That's fine. You keep playing as normal. The only caveat is that cards that interact with your deck, you won't be able to do those things anymore. So remember that one reset per turn. Well, if you've got no more deck, there's nothing to reset to. So you can't do any more resets. So cards that rely on resetting and such, those won't work anymore. But otherwise, there's no other penalty from running out of your deck. And then after that, we go into the end phase, and that's when your turn ends, and you're just literally just gonna look at each player's discard. Once a player has 10 or more points, they lose the game. Now, I did mention that you can play with multiple players, and it does get a little bit chaotic. It's more of a fun mode, but you know, again, it is very fun. So I'll try to explain as best I can, although there is a diagram in the book that is much cleaner, and it'll show you how to play with all the rules. But essentially, it plays the same. You're trying to play to a certain amount of points, and what you do is each player is going to have their entity in play, right? So I have mine here. There's let's say that's player 2, player 3 over there, and player 4 over here. And you have the same types of combat positions. You have your melee, you have your 2 flank positions, and your 2 support positions. Same thing over here. Player 2, this is his melee, flank, support. Player 4 over here, he has his melee, 2 flank, and 2 support, and so on. So everybody's is the same. Now the difference is where you can attack on your turn during your combat phase. You're basically choosing if you're going to be attacking to the left or to the right, and really it's just going to matter on the situation. So for instance, my melee position character here can do a melee attack to either one of the 2 melee cards to either side of me. It can also choose to do a flank attack to one of the 2 flank positions on the left or right of me, but it can't reach the one all the way across. So Julia here can't do a flank attack over there. She can do one over here. So in multiplayer, you actually have your melee character actually has 4 different spots that can hit attack. Your flank position guys, as usual, they're a little bit more limited. They can only attack left or right, they can only attack to the side that they are. So Jake over here is on the left, so he can only attack to the left player. He can do a flank attack to either his melee position or his other flank, his side flank position. Again, support cards don't attack, nor can they be attacked. Again, sometimes there's exceptions to that. So that's the main difference of multiplayer brawl, is you're just choosing whether you're attacking left or right. Now there's no elimination in multiplayer brawl. You're just gonna keep playing until somebody has 10 points in the discard pile at the end of a turn, and once one player gets to 10 or more points, the game will end. It will stop. And then at that point, the player with the least amount of points in their discard pile wins the game. If there's a tie on how many points they have, then the player with the least amount of killed characters will be declared the winner. And if that is still a tie, well then, sorry, that's a joint victory. And so that's how to play the Animus draft building card game. There are a few rules that I may have not covered. There's a couple just very niche rules that is covered in the rule booklet. I didn't go over like how every keyword works, but there's a glossary in the back of the book that goes over that. So you should really read the core rules book. That will cover every single thing. And there are more sets coming. So if you think this is not enough, and I guarantee you this is plenty. Again, remember, out of 36 cards, you only be using 9 each game. You're gonna have a different roster each game. But there are more core sets and some expansion sets coming, and we'll go into those in more detail. And all of that is 100% compatible, and you'll be able to mix it all together for more variety. And just remember, again, out of one box, not 2, one box, you can play up to 4 players. And when you start adding other stuff, it's gonna be a lot of variety. So hopefully you're interested, hopefully you learn something, and if you are interested in this and want to get a copy of yourself, there is a link below, www.animuscardgame.com, and get your copy today.